Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. So, we're going to be breaking down what seems like a really simple children's story. You know the one, a classic tale about a sleep-deprived mouse and a mighty lion. But look, we aren't just reading a bedtime story today. We're going to completely deconstruct the underlying themes of this narrative to uncover some honestly profound lessons about the true measure of power, the absolute necessity of humility, and the totally unexpected strength you can find in kindness. It's a genuinely fascinating dynamic, and we're going to break the whole thing down for you.
Can the smallest act of kindness tame the biggest ego? I want you to just keep that question right in the back of your mind as we go through today's explainer. I mean, it is so easy to look at a fairy tale and just see talking animals, right? But this story actually challenges us to look a lot deeper. It asks us to really examine how power structures work, how arrogance completely blinds us, and how a little bit of empathy can totally reset the playing field.
Part 1. The big, noisy problem.
Okay, so every good story starts with a conflict. And the conflict here is incredibly relatable, especially if you've ever had to deal with a really noisy neighbor. Picture this, we've got a little mouse living in a lush forest who is facing a massive, noisy problem. Over in a neighboring cave, a huge bear has been hibernating for months. And this bear, he is snoring loudly, like so loudly that the poor little mouse literally hasn't slept all winter. It's one of those deeply frustrating situations where the small are entirely at the mercy of the big and oblivious. But our mouse doesn't just sit around. He takes action. Step 1, he tries the direct approach. He marches up to the bear, yells at him that summer is here, and tells him to wake up. Nothing. So step 2, he escalates. The mouse actually comes back with a bugle and blows it vigorously right in the bear's face. Still, the bear just keeps on sleeping. Wandering around, completely exhausted and sad, the mouse runs into some forest friends who suggest step 3. Seeking out the lion. They tell him the lion's roar is so loud that everyone jumps the second they hear it. Now it's a drastic measure for sure, but the exhausted little guy is completely out of options.
Part 2. The arrogance of power.
So this is where the power dynamics of our story really come to light. The little mouse takes his friend's advice and goes to find the king of the forest. And just notice the stark contrast here. On one side, we have the mighty king. He's fearsome, he's massive, a beast known for earth-shattering roars. And on the other side, our tiny rodent. Small, sleep-deprived, speaking with this tiny trembling voice. In fact, the mouse is so terrified when he sees the sleeping lion outside his cave that he actually decides to just give up and go home. But in his panic, he accidentally steps on a branch. Snap! The sound wakes the big cat, and suddenly the tiny mouse is face to face with the ultimate authority of the forest, having to beg for assistance to wake his snoring neighbor.
The lion's response? It perfectly captures his absolute arrogance. He says, "I don't have time to spend for a tiny little useless mouse like you." I mean, wow. The lion literally tells the mouse he isn't even big enough to be considered snack size. He declares himself king of the forest and just turns and walks away. This brilliantly illustrates a classic failure of humility. You see, the lion is measuring the mouse's worth entirely by his physical size. He's totally blinded by the arrogance of his own power, dismissing the mouse as useless because he just assumes someone that small could never ever offer anything of value to a king.
Part 3. The reversal of fortune.
Well, suddenly the tone of our narrative shifts drastically. The mighty lion, who literally just finished boasting about his ultimate superiority, runs into a deeply uncomfortable problem, and it's one that he absolutely cannot roar his way out of. There's actually a perfect word for this situation: schadenfreude. It means finding pleasure in someone else's misfortune, and honestly, it is really hard not to feel a little bit of it here. The lion, trying to hide away in a dark corner where no one can see him, starts itching like crazy. He doesn't want anyone to see him like this because, he's supposed to be the dignified king of the forest. Meanwhile, the sad little mouse is walking home, and he hears this wheezing coming from the depths of the woods. He follows the sound and finds the lion itching himself nonstop, just looking incredibly silly. The mighty king has been completely brought low by something microscopic.
Let's just track this frantic escalation for a second, because the lion is getting desperate. Within minutes, he's leaning and scratching heavily against a tree. Then, as the hours go by and the discomfort grows, he's rubbing right and left, totally unable to stop. It actually gets so bad he frantically runs to a nearby lake and throws himself right into the water just to drown out the itch. Finally, he crawls out and shakes himself dry, just shivering and shaking his body so hard. It's this pitiful, desperate sequence of events, but it highlights perfectly how the mighty can fall to the absolute smallest of problems. All his roaring, all his massive size, all his supposed power, completely useless against an itch.
Part 4. The power of kindness.
Okay, so this is the crucial moral pivot of our entire explainer. The mouse has every single reason to just walk away and let the rude lion suffer. But instead, he investigates. He approaches the embarrassed lion, who, by the way, tells the mouse to leave him alone again. But the mouse looks closely and spots the real issue, a bunch of tiny jumping fleas hiding in the lion's thick, scruffy fur. Ignoring the lion's rude demands to get off, the little mouse bravely jumps right onto the massive beast. He crawls through the thick fur, literally throwing the fleas out one by one. And get this, he holds on for dear life while the lion crushes him against a tree, and he nearly drowns when the lion jumps into the lake. But the mouse stays right there until he throws out the very last flea. That is a stunning display of unconditional kindness. The mouse doesn't keep a scorecard of past insults, he just sees someone in pain and decides to help.
Part 5. A lesson in humility. So, as the frantic shaking stops and the itching finally fades away, we reach the quiet aftermath. The physical problem is solved, sure, but the emotional and moral weight of what just happened falls squarely on the lion's shoulders. And the lion makes a truly stunning admission. He says, "I looked down on you, mouse, but you still did everything in your power to save me." He is deeply embarrassed by how rude he was earlier. By saying these exact words to the mouse, he's openly acknowledging his own arrogance as well as the mouse's incredible grace. It is this beautiful moment where a massive ego is completely shattered by pure kindness.
And that brings us to the true definition of humility. It's having a modest view of one's own importance and recognizing the inherent value of others regardless of their size. The lion learned the hard way that power does not equal worth. That tiny, quote-unquote, useless mouse was literally the only one who could navigate that thick fur and pluck out those fleas. This shows us exactly how humility bridges the massive gap between the powerful and the powerless. When we recognize that everyone has inherent value, we actually build a community that can support one another.
Which leads us to a highly satisfying resolution. The debt is officially repaid with one massive, cave-shaking roar. The humbled lion tells the mouse to hop on his back and personally gives him a ride home. When they arrive, they hear that bear, still snoring loudly inside the cave. So the king of the forest steps up, takes a massive deep breath, and unleashes a roar so incredibly powerful that the literal stone floor shakes. The big silly bear finally snaps awake, running out completely confused, asking if summer has come, while the rest of the forest animals laugh and the little mouse rejoices that he can finally get some sleep.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative question. Who might you be underestimating in your own circle? We just seen how a mighty lion almost lost his mind over a few fleas, only to be saved by the absolute smallest creature he had just insulted. The power of kindness and humility isn't just some fairy tale concept, guys. It's a real-world tool that solves problems that arrogance never, ever could. So take a look around your own life, reflect on this, and just make sure you aren't ignoring the hidden power of those you might view as small. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today on The Explainer, and keep learning.